Reflection for the fifth Sunday of Easter from John's Gospel in chapter 14. Do not let your hearts be troubled. One of the many differences and disruptions that our current circumstances have brought, and perhaps one of the saddest of them, is the reduction in the numbers of those who are able to attend funerals. How can we properly say goodbye to those we've loved and who've died when only 10 people can gather? Recently, a long-standing friend of mine who lives in Queensland was unable to be at the funeral of her brother who died here in Western Australia. She arrived in time and was just able to farewell him in hospital, but needed to go back into quarantine and wasn't able to be at the funeral. Fortunately, we were able to be of a little bit of help for her. We know that as a diocese that we would have all wanted to have come together to be at the funeral for Bishop Brian Keim, to give thanks to God for his distinguished ministry, to show our love and our support for his family. And we'll do that in time, but still we couldn't be there on the day. So many families for whom that has been the reality here in Perth, in Western Australia, around the country, and more so around the whole world. Well, the reading from John's Gospel set for today is one that is often read at funerals. Others who have been offering reflections have mentioned this as well. Jesus' words to his disciples, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. In my Father's house there are many dwelling places," have long provided an appropriate message of comfort and hope for those who are mourning. Well, we're certainly experiencing and painfully coming to grips with many dwelling places, confined as we've been mainly to our own homes, and certainly as we've been unable to gather as people of God in our church buildings. But in the context in which John has Jesus say these words, they seem rather strange. In fact, from a purely human point of view, they're inexplicable. Jesus says them on the night he's to be handed over to those who will try and torture and kill him. They come after one of those he's known and walked with closely has gone to betray him. And they come immediately after Jesus tells the remaining disciples that where he is going, they cannot come. So they are offered as words of comfort, but they are offered in an especially bleak time. Yet Christians have always found in the words and the life of and in Jesus himself, not least in his own death and resurrection, a source of hope and of comfort. They found that hope and comfort even in the darkest and bleakest of times. So the writer of the first letter of Peter can talk to a community that is suffering great persecution and trial, encourage them to endure, because to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow. And he did this chiefly when he entrusted himself to God. What is it then that sustains Christian people? Well, partly, as the writer tells them and us, because they and we recognise that we are aliens and exiles. Or as the letter to the Hebrews puts it, here we have no abiding city. They, like us, are in the world, and so they and we should conduct ourselves honourably in the world, accepting the authority of every human institution, even if that means accepting restrictions on gathering together. But we also recognise that whatever the joys, disruptions, or particularly in their situation, the horrors that the world offers, this is not our final home. That is the comfort and the hope that Jesus offers his disciples on the night he is taken from them. In my Father's house, there are many dwelling places. and I go to prepare a place for you. Perhaps that's what the writer of Acts, in that other reading given for us to reflect on this Sunday, is showing. As he approaches death, Stephen has a vision of the risen and ascended Jesus standing at the right hand of God. Standing, not sitting, as we usually say. Perhaps that's because Jesus is standing to welcome Stephen into his Father's house. The same Holy Spirit seeks to inspire that same vision in us today. As aliens and exiles in this world, and in the many dwelling places in which we are currently, and from which we cannot gather as we are used as God's own people, we can still see the home that is prepared for us. By faith, we can recognise that even in many dwelling places, we are still one part of the one house that is God's, that Jesus points his disciples to and promises he prepares for them. Just as Jesus will soon say, though we are a number of branches, there is only one vine. So there is indeed comfort in these words, and we should not let our hearts be troubled. Our true native land, as St Thomas Aquinas put it beautifully in a hymn, is the reality that exists and that we see when we walk by faith and not by sight. Jesus is indeed the way to his Father's house. And if we allow the Spirit, he promises to remind us of all he has taught. Then we can also recognise in the words we hear or read every day the truth that he offers and the life which through him we and all those who have followed him from Stephen's time on share in and through the God who is the source of all life, even the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.